they want to see that she is her own person, that she can defend and advance the things that she believes in. And all of that was absent from the interview. And for the interview to be considered a success simply because she didn't stumble or fall as her predecessor had is a sign that blue is attempting to redefine legitimacy itself.
This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius, John Batchelor. I welcome Germanicus, Michael Vlahos. We're in Londinium. It's 91 AD, late summer. We're surrounded by centurions and their families, retired centurions with great stories, bustling about the market. The days are shorter here in Londinium now, but very happy. We're going to go to the theater next. Right now, we're discussing events of the 21st century. Our century, the first century AD, is fixed. We're nearing the end of it. We have an emperor who is not adequate for the Senate, and that's always tension. Our idea of entertainment, however, is to look at the emperor for the inheritor of the Roman Empire. That would be the American Empire. And in the year 2024, there is a surprising contrast, one that we've been through in our century, which is the rise of the empire replacing the republic. And as you recall from your Roman history, that involved not only Julius Caesar and his death and the battle between Octavian, the inheritor of Caesar's mantle, an adopted son, and Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant general for his campaigns, but also the significant presence of a very powerful woman, Cleopatra, in Alexandria, and Cleopatra's presence in both the drama with Caesar and the drama with Mark Antony has reverberated through the first century AD, and a number of women in the Julian Claudian family have been successful at wielding power. However, now the American Empire must confront this same contrast. It's not only two parties facing each other, it's a man and a woman facing each other. And Harris, in the last week, faced the cameras as Cleopatra of the 21st century and did very well in my measure. She made no major mistakes. She made no stumbles about her policy. She repeated or paraphrased the campaign speech she's been giving, which is very successful, especially in the 7 swing states, especially in Pennsylvania. And for an example, nothing sharp here. Once upon a time when she was a California senator, California Attorney General, DA of San Francisco, and then a senator from California, she was for converting the automobile and trucking fleet to all batteries all the time. In other words, either Teslas or something similar, EVs they're called, and converting the electricity grid to renewables. That would be solar and wind, and perhaps there are other examples. Nuclear is a possibility. However, now on the campaign trail, she has not reversed those opinions. You'd have to say she's erased the sharp distinctions that existed before. For example, she says she's no longer for a ban on fracking in Pennsylvania and other states. No ban leaves a lot of room to be redefined according to the costs that it would involve continuing fracking in Pennsylvania. But all of this is acceptable to the Democratic Party. So I turn to Germanicus and say, Cleopatra in the 21st century is doing very well. How do you measure her? Good day to you, Germanicus.
Good day, Gaius, or I should say good evening. The issue at stake that we have been discussing for the last couple of weeks is the issue of imperial succession, because the United States as an empire is also a polity built around the institution as well as the person of the emperor. And the issue of succession then becomes critical. If you have vested the office of president with imperial powers, but also imperial responsibility, not just for the conduct of affairs, foreign and domestic, but also for the health and equanimity of the nation itself, then the person who succeeds as emperor must have legitimacy with opponents as well as his own factions. And this is the most worrisome issue, most troubling issue in the United States today, in that succession as a transfer of legitimacy has unraveled, and it's unraveled for both parties. And for Blue, with Ms. Harris, it is not the first problem of establishing legitimacy. The same problem existed with her predecessor, her senior emperor, Mr. Biden. And in both cases, the Democrats, or I should say just Blue from now on, Blue has decided to, in place emperors who have very little legitimacy and therefore very little actual authority. And that has turned out very badly. It turned out almost disastrously with the fall of Mr. Biden. And it turned out disastrously in the sense that there is no path to legitimacy without a display of effective leadership. And in the absence of that, he had to be defenestrated. And that was, of course, the hallmark of Roman imperial succession as well. Now, Ms. Harris, in contrast to Cleopatra or Livia or Fulvia or Messalina or Agrippinilla, or all of the very powerful and effective Roman imperial women, is essentially that she is a hollow vessel or an empty vessel. And the thing that Americans most wanted and need to see is that she can be not simply an effective leader, because that is unknown until she were to gain the succession and then be inaugurated in office. What Americans need to see is that she has the qualities that they seek in an emperor. And with Ms. Harris, she is essentially an unknown in the American consciousness. And to the extent that people are politically discerning, or that they demand an emperor who can lead, they want to see that she is her own person, that she can defend and advance the things that she believes in. And all of that was absent from the interview. And for the interview to be considered a success simply because she didn't stumble or fall as her predecessor had is a sign that Blue is attempting to redefine legitimacy itself. So that legitimacy does not require any sort of cognitive or leadership capability. It simply involves presentation, however orchestrated and managed it might be. In other words, Blue is attempting to redefine the office of emperor as a mere figurehead, and thus as the representation, the face of what is in effect an oligarchic rule. And this is a risky move, and it's the only move that Blue has, given the fact that it has found itself for a second time in a position where it does not have a person who is up to the job. And in any other situation, the other party would have destroyed any hopes that Blue might prevail in this election, because were they to advance an effective leader who is part of the institutional framework of the imperial office, then they would be marching to a very strong victory. But that is not exactly the case. So you have a weak Republican leadership offer, and you have a non-existent blue leadership offer. And the way that the blue oligarchs have tried to reframe the entire process is to do so as if it were an event in which one could invest their emotion, because it is no different than a divertissement, an entertainment. And many in the electorate buy into that. And so you have the opportunity here to alter the terms of the constitutional order itself, where the president becomes no more than, say, the monarch is in the United Kingdom. And this is a very difficult position. Now, in earlier times in America, it wouldn't matter who was nominated for president because, say, in the 1870s and 80s, after Grant, that is, citizens voted for the party. They didn't really worry about whether their standard bearer was a real leader, although they wanted that, obviously. That's why they nominated Garfield and then eventually McKinley. But the fact is, it wasn't necessary. But this is not that world. And the United States is not the United States of the later 19th century. And so there is an expectation, I think, among the broad swath of the electorate for a capable person to be inaugurated as president, and that does not now exist. So there are tremendous risks that blue runs right now, and we will not know in the course of this week or next week, but over the course of several weeks, the next 70 days, it will become clear whether or not the Democrats, blue, has been successful in reframing the terms of imperial succession.
You momentarily gave yourself away, Germanicus, when you used the modifier capable about the alternative choice. However.
Yeah, in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah, momentarily. We're not here to praise the old Caesar. We're here to speak of the new.
Right.
So we're going to turn to issue that the new Caesar will inherit, certainly, which is World War Zelensky. Michael Vlahos, Germanicus, is here in Londinium, reflecting upon the events of these last days. For the Roman Empire's inheritor, the American Empire, they've hit an unusual patch in terms of candidates for the emperor's job in 2025. So there's uncertainty here as to what that will mean for blue or red. There is certainty, however, about the war in Europe. There are three conflicts going on in Eurasia. There's the war in the Middle East, Israel versus Iran. There's the war in East Asia, the People's Republic of China versus the United States and its allies, Japan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand. The war is not kinetic, but it's up to everything, including cyber. And the war in Europe, the war that led by Mr. Zelensky since the beginning. Is it a civil war or is it a war of invasion? We have not answered that question, and we're not going to attempt it. We are going to say there have been signs of the gods voting in some fashion these last days. One, the F-16, 6 of them delivered after a year and a half of talk. One of them down with a master pilot. Friendly fire or not, gone. Zelensky has fired the head of Air Force, as if that will come to something. 2, the offensive against the Kursk Oblast. That has permitted the Russian forces to make advances that look, according to analysts, to be irreversible towards gobbling up the whole of the Donbass, at least Luhansk and Donetsk provinces. And 3, Zelensky himself must be aware that the politics are a ticking bomb now. There's the U.S. election. We know that Mr. Trump, the red team, has not indicated continuing support. We do not have clarity on the blue team, but we cannot expect too much in the way of war fighting from a candidate who's campaigning entirely on domestic issues. And three, a vote in Germany for the alternative for Deutschland, which the European press in English insists upon calling the charming far-right party. It's neither this nor that, but we know it's anti-immigrant, we know it's anti-Ukraine, we know it's anti-Berlin. It's a 999 party. It has its echo in the National Assembly in France, certainly in the party in power in Rome for Giorgia Meloni. These parties are not welcoming to immigrants, and they're certainly not interested in foreign entanglements, weapon systems taking on the giant Russia. Germanicus, the three blows to Ukraine, the loss of the F-16, the advances in Donetsk and Luhansk province, and the vote in Germany, they're not the end of the story. So I ask the Churchillian question, is this the end of the beginning?
Well, let's go back to the beginning. And what was the beginning? As Romans, we understand in our bones the irrepressible motivation of our emperors to reinforce and extend their authority through a victorious foreign war. And the great progenitor of that need, political need, was Julius Caesar, the great Gaius Julius Caesar himself, who actually waged an entire genocidal war, killing 1 million Gauls so that he could write a book celebrating his victory. And that created a kind of archetypal literary military paradigm that we Romans have followed ever since. Every Roman emperor who aspires not just to greatness, but to longevity of his term is going to pursue such a war. And in that sense, Mr. Biden, who felt that he must not only live up to the greatness of a mentor he knew, LBJ, but LBJ wanted to live up to FDR in the same way. And so to be FDR, you must have a great war. And Biden was able to help shape and provoke such a war. And this war at this point, and I make this judgment ruefully, is that as things are unraveling now in Ukraine, the entire effort looks very much like that of the great Augustus and his gambit to extend across the Rhine, Germany, under Roman rule, to the river that future generations will call the Elbe, that failed disastrously with the destruction, the annihilation of Varus's 3 legions. And there are other great Roman disasters that were contemporaneous. Carrhae, for example, the destruction of Crassus and his legions by the Parthians, and many others to come. Julian the Apostate, Valens, all of these speak to a need for the foreign war to be pursued for domestic purposes. And when it goes against domestic needs, especially the needs of the imperial office, those wars are dispensed with. So just to circle back to Augustus and the 3 legions, not only were the legions destroyed, but their sacred legionary standards were lost. Excuse me, not at Teutoburger Wald, but at Carrhae. So circling back to Carrhae, the legionary standards of Crassus's army were lost. And rather than go to war, Augustus, who was already chastened by the earlier disaster at Teutoburger Wald, actually went to the Parthians and said, what will it take for me to get those standards back? Because the Roman legionary standard was a sacred object, and it contained the spirit of Roman eternal victory. So he bargained to get those back. And this is all just a prelude to a way of saying that I really do think that we're blue to triumph in November. It would drop the whole Ukraine war. It would bargain to get those legionary standards back because the war has become destructive. And one of the reasons it has become so destructive is that the major battlefront today is not on the front lines of Ukraine or in Palestine and Galilee or even in the China Sea. It's here at home, and this is where the rebellion of the so-called right in Europe becomes important because it is a mirror of what is happening within the United States itself. Without regard to the victory of Mr. Trump or not, there is a powerful movement in the US, France, of course, we see Italy, Britain, Germany, in which the loss of trust and feeling of betrayal by an oligarchic class, which is evident even more strongly in Europe than it is in the US in the form of the EU. All of this is much more pressing and needs to be dealt with vigorously by the ruling class. And given the disastrous unraveling in Ukraine, which I think will reach its climax and then its denouement fairly quickly, there is going to be a desire to cut the encumbrance after the election and move to better control the rest of politics in Europe and especially in the US. And here I have to say that the 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 flip side of a victorious foreign war is a disastrous foreign war that undercuts your legitimacy even more. And that is one of the main practical reasons you distance yourself from such an enterprise when it begins to fail.
I agree with you, Germanicus. It is momentarily diverting to imagine who Red will blame if Red inherits the emperor's chair in January. And the same for Blue, who Blue will blame. But like the Afghanistan model, it's not necessary to blame anybody. Just don't talk about it. Just
right. You memory hold, as they say today.
And Vietnam, Germanicus?
I don't know that anyone even remembers Vietnam at this point, except for one motorcycle cavalcade that occurs in Washington every year that people give no attention to. It's very sad, but it is the nature of empire to minimize your losses and maximize your strengths. After all, look at Trajan going to Dacia. He fought an entire war so he could build a column in the heart of Rome. I mean, this is how interconnected foreign wars are with domestic politics and the legitimacy and authority of the imperial office.
Germanicus is Michael Vlahos. I'm Gaius, John Batchelor. I'm in Londinium. We want one more glimpse of Cleopatra as told by Plutarch. The playwrights have all had their approach to it, turning on the love story between Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and not much emphasis of the love story between Caesar and Cleopatra. Cleopatra was 28 when she met Mark Antony on her barge, arrayed with gold and silver, and he was charmed and soon became her devoted companion. The playwrights use the word love. I'm not against that. I'm just setting aside the fact that Cleopatra was a queen. And queens exercising power in the Roman world were up against a far different civil society than we have here in the 21st century. But there are limits that strike me as similar. And the one that comes to me, Germanicus, to mention is a woman wearing a sword, whatever metaphorically that will look like. In the Roman world, it was said that weakened Mark Antony. In the Roman world, it was said that Mark Antony's wife, Fulvia, until her death, weakened him because she connived against Cleopatra. In the Roman world, it was said that Octavian made marriages for his advancement, his career, not out of love, hence Livia. In the Roman world, it was said that a woman was a foil who could damage your reputation and didn't much enhance it unless she had a brother or a father or a sister you wanted to bring into your conclave in the Roman world. I don't know that there are similar examples of that here. We've had leaders, female leaders in Europe recently. Angela Merkel comes to immediate mind. However, in the real, what we have of Plutarch, Cleopatra was powerful, and Octavia respected it. Octavian did. And the suicide events of those last days, Antony killing himself and being dragged into the mausoleum and dying with blood everywhere, and then Cleopatra entertaining poison in the asp if she used a snake. All of that suggests that Cleopatra had power quite separate from anything else that the Romans had encountered. That model, Cleopatra, is that possible in American empire in the 21st century? Your measure. We just have a few minutes.
It is elusive, as you once characterized Ms. Harris, and it's extremely elusive in an overarching spirit of the age, which celebrates women and in which women are the privileged element of society, and in many cases hold the whip hand in society. And yet it is difficult to extend that to the sphere of warrior engagement, in spite of all the efforts of woke Hollywood to force that image upon us. It still has not taken, certainly not taken root. And if one were to look back at relatively modern archetypal women, on one hand, you have Elizabeth Tudor and you have Catherine the Great, both of whom were able to exercise power as a man by creating a martial image, being seen in armor, for example, or dressing in men's military uniforms, as Catherine the Great did. Then, as an alternative, though, you have the strong empress as the mother of the nation. And that was certainly Maria Theresa, who had many, many children. I can't even remember how many. And also, you have Victoria, and she was helped, as was Maria Theresa, by having a very strong man who could conduct the military affairs of the state, like Potemkin for Catherine the Great, for example. And the being the not the Queen Empress who actually ran things, that helped to have a constitutional parliamentary state, and for the Queen, the monarch, to be above that. And so it gave free rein for men to both look up to the Queen Empress Victoria, but also to shine in their own light and to have great heroes like Chinese Gordon, for example, who was then known as Gordon Pasha after. And this is not possible in the US today. And so rather than choosing one of those figures as her political consort, shall we say, vice president, she chose a modern man. And if you look at the figures of modern men who might serve as warrior models, you look at the current Mr. Waltz, or you look at General Milley, who does not come across as, say, a Pershing or a Patton, shall we, just to be kind. You have essentially a process ongoing in the US where the military itself is becoming, like the rest of society, more feminized. And as a result, it's hard to know what the longer term course of the US will be, because you do not have an example of a feminized empire exerting any kind of real military authority. And not to sound as though this is my own prejudice or opinion, but if you were to look at Chinese and Russian recruiting ads today, if you were to look also at their propaganda regarding, say, in Russia, the course of the war, it draws a very stark contrast, almost brutally so, between the warrior Russian, the descendants of the great Russians of times past, going all the way back to Ilya Muromets or Alexander Nevsky, for example, and then they show not just a feminized America, but something far more insidious and degraded and corrupted and feminized men. And this is unfortunately an undertone that adheres to the blue campaign, and whether or not that has an impact, we don't know. But it does certainly suggest a pullback after the election if blue were to prevail from places like Ukraine. And
you see that Harris would have the same limitations that Cleopatra had, and maybe even more.
Well, Cleopatra was a pharaoh, and pharaohs could be women, as you remember. You have
but she wasn't Roman.
No, she wasn't Roman. But what I'm trying to say is the Roman variation that evolved in Egypt under the Ptolemies allowed for a queen to be a kind of a living god. And therefore, the issue of whether she was female or not was less critical. And that was never going to be possible in Rome. It was possible in Celtic Britain, though, if you remember. She was in a different realm altogether.
I want to press the point about Cleopatra. We use her name because it's a myth, but the real Cleopatra is very difficult to get close to. How she managed her throne through the intricacies of the Roman invasion. And we don't have a comparable model to that here in America. We've not been invaded. We don't have to deal with a viceroy from
right
at this point.
Well, she was clearly her father's son. And the Ptolemaic line was the last of the three great dynasties of the Hellenistic world. And they were descendants, all of them, of Alexander. They were originally his three successor generals. And it was extremely difficult for the Greek East to accommodate and accept the fact that Rome had dominion over the Mediterranean at this point. And she did her best, but it was a cul-de-sac. And the Greeks would rise up again and take over the Roman Empire 2.5 centuries later. But at the time of Cleopatra, Rome was unstoppable.
Germanicus, Michael Vlahos, I'm Gaius, John Batchelor. We're entertaining the myth of Cleopatra here in the 21st century. But the myth of Cleopatra, I read again and again, was what the Romans preferred as well. They turned it and turned it and turned it for several hundred years, probably still turning it with Giorgia Meloni in the role of the Empress today in Rome. Michael, and this is Londinium. We're on our way to the theater. Tonight's a pantomime of Cannae, which was a real Roman victory. No hesitation whatsoever. Several hundred years ago. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm John Batchelor.